Hey, I'm Stephanie Hunt. Welcome to the Cult of Flair, where I chat with creators from all walks of life about the meaning of personal style, fearless individuality, unexpected paths, and insights into finding your flair. Alongside my in-depth interview series, you'll also find snackable short episodes. I do love my snacks. I call these my Flair on the fly. I'll be serving up tips, musings, or insightful nuggets designed to expand your knowledge and to share the flair. Welcome back to the Cult of Flair. I'm Stephanie Hunt, also known as the Flairhunter. Today, I'm here with my new friend, Deborah Lindquist, though I've known of you for a while. So excited to have you. Deborah Lindquist, my guest today, has been a trailblazer at the forefront of the stylish eco-fashion movement for over 4 decades, which to me means you must have started when you were 4 because you don't look old enough. She is continuing making an impact while remaining true to her love for the environment, thus earning her the moniker of Green Queen. Deborah was originally trained at Parsons School of Design in New York City, and after a successful career in New York, she moved to the West Coast in 1989 to launch her clothing line. She started with one-of-a-kind jackets, vests, and bustiers made of vintage fabrics, and is designed for celebrities such as, wait for it, all names I know and I'm super impressed by: Rihanna, Paula Abdul, Gwen Stefani, Pink, Christina Aguilera, and many others. I'm excited to introduce fellow creator Deborah Lindquist, whose unique designs should actually be under the definition of flair. Welcome, Deborah.
Thank you for having me.
I just really appreciate it. And we were just talking about your parachute skirt. You're wearing one. And I found out about you from social media. In my procrastinate scrolling, I call it, when I'm supposed to be doing other things. And then you get sucked into the world of Instagram because you don't want to do the things you're supposed to be doing. And so much fashion pops up on my feed because even though I'm an interior designer, I'm fashion obsessed and I love it. Might have a little clothing problem in my closet right now. And color, I love color. I love one-of-a-kind things. I love quirky things. And I saw this image, a post of this really cool, beautiful model wearing this taxi cab yellow, long nylon skirt to the ground with interesting seams. And then I read that it was made from upcycled, salvaged old parachutes. And I was like, what? So then I started digging around and saw Kelly Green, my other color I'm obsessed with. And it was at a brick and mortar store called Zenzi in a great part of Salt Lake City, Maven District. And then I just first I thought it was just something that maybe one of those owners made, and didn't even realize until I did some more digging that you were the designer for these. And then just started learning more about you and your whole career and history. And I think you are just fascinating. And in a world where I probably had never even heard of the notion of upcycled, sustainable fashion, things like that, dead stock fabric, I really have only been made aware of that concept in the last 5 years. And then maybe in the last year, really started digging into it and thinking it's just really applauding so many people and companies focused on this. And the fact that you have been knowledgeable about all of this and working in this field for decades is incredible to me.
Yeah, I started before there was a name for it.
What came first, the love of fashion and going to school for fashion, or the idea of sustainability and upcycling things? Or did you learn about that in school?
I grew up on a farm in Minnesota. So it was my great-grandfather built the farm. And our attic was full of Victorian clothing, handmade, hand embroidered, all kinds of interesting
Would
things.
be like a museum.
Yeah. My mom decided that we needed to fix up the attic. And so she laid a floor down because my dad refused to help her for some reason. I don't know why. She's like, fine.
It was the era.
I'll take the lumber and I'll put it up there. And he's like, really? So I was fascinated because I would open up all these trunks and try things on, and then some things fit me, you know. But we were farmers, so it wasn't like we had the most.
Were you a little kid?
Well, yes. I mean, I grew up there.
Yeah,
So yeah, when I was little,
okay.
I would just dig through things. And I just noticed all the handwork and all the love that went into all of these things, and the shape and just the construction, because at that time everything was made by hand.
Right
Before the Industrial Revolution, people were sewing, doing custom things. And then we had a treadle machine that belonged to, I believe, my grandmother.
I don't even know what that is.
It's a foot pedal machine.
Okay.
So it operates just like a regular machine, but it's not electric.
Sewing machine.
So my mom let me use a treadle machine because I was 5, and she figured, well, she's not going to sew over her hand because it's a foot pedal.
She can't really get hurt.
Right. So theoretically, yes, I did hand sewing too and started sewing for my dolls and making patterns and things like that. Then later on, I made clothes for myself.
Okay.
Around 8th grade, actually.
So really, it wasn't sounding like to me, it wasn't necessarily that you were in fashion school and thought like, I'm going to focus on sustainability. It
Mm-mm.
was like probably just infused in you as a
Yes.
kid growing up and how to reuse and remake things that you already have, right?
Yeah, it was. And
Yeah.
then being, I was the youngest kid, so I had to kind of make my own fun because
Mhm.
my sister and brother were quite a bit older, 13 and 17 years older than me, and I just created a relationship with the animals and learned how they communicate, which is telepathically. So I learned how to communicate with animals and without really kind
Oh
of
my gosh,
understanding
that
it.
is
And then the
fascinating.
plants, and I had this favorite oak tree that would give me messages. And
Oh
so
my gosh, I love
I
this.
know it's
Which
really,
I have had the good fortune of seeing your work. So the fact that you use garments or
hmm
pillows using, animal faces and trees and things like
yes.
this, really, really special.
So that connection with nature translated into what I like to do while I was, designing for brands before I
Mhm.
started my own line.
What have you seen over the years in terms of challenges that you faced with materials or producing sustainable fashion? Would it be
Mm.
access to items, or there's so much out there, it probably wouldn't be access? Would it be from an actual business standpoint and you're trying to sell it? Like, I would think early days, was there not much of a demand for it, or it didn't even matter? You just were going to do it anyway and know that if you're producing something beautiful and interesting, that the business part of it would follow.
Well, when I started, it was in 1983. So the 80s were very big
Yes.
clothes, big
Big
accessories,
hair, big shoulder
everything. And
pads.
people were, a lot of the brands were being produced in the United States. So, I mean, in the Carolinas, we had the fabric producers
Okay.
and so on. There was plenty of everything around and plenty of stores, and people were really, really interested in buying luxury goods. So I paid so much money for this bag, and that was something to be proud of.
Right.
Instead of I got it, so cheap
Mhm.
and, the way
That's
things are
so
now.
true. I even think
Mhm.
of TV where, like, I think of the '80s and everything was like Dallas and Dynasty and LA Law and, like,
A
those
lot
kinds
of
of
shoulder pads,
shoulder
yeah.
pads and glitzy and all of that.
Mhm.
Where cut to today, my kids who are in their 20s and their girlfriends, like, that's the last thing they would want. Like,
Mm.
they wanna thrift, and whether it's their furniture or their clothing,
Mhm.
I love that that's celebrated, but
Thrifting is nice. It's not a way to, from a business standpoint, businesses can't survive
right.
on just
It's
you
true.
throwing your stuff away and then
Right.
buying it again.
Yeah.
And
That's a
now
really good point.
and now with all the crappy clothing,
Mhm.
there is no real vintage except for designer vintage.
Okay.
I mean, it's not going to last because it doesn't last very long
Right, the
anyway.
fast fashion.
The
Right,
fast
so it's
fashion.
not it's gonna disintegrate before it's still around 40
Yeah, it's
years
not
from
made
now.
well. It's not meant to last. It's made to fall apart so you can buy it again.
Right. I know when we spoke initially, you told me that you had started a company right after Parsons,
Hmm
and you're in New York, and that was mostly belts?
Yes, I started, when I came out of Parsons, I started working for a company called Kelwood. I was designing sleepwear and lingerie. It was kind of a volume-based, business, and then I designed infant and toddler boys' clothes for Garanimals.
That's right, I
Yeah,
love
which was so
Garanimals.
fun. Yeah, it was really, really cute. And then we did production in the Mississippi and Alabama. So we would travel to the South
Mhm.
to work with the sample makers and not really the production people because, once the samples were okay, then the production just was handled in a different way. But we did work with the sample makers to work on the clothes and so on. But I had an idea was in the garment district in the millinery kind of district, and I found this cool Milanese mesh. I didn't know what it was called at the time, but it was knitted wire, and it was just kind of hanging there in this really messy place. And I thought, this is really cool. And
Wait, what is
everything
it
was
used
so
for?
chainmailish and so kind of like punk. And I was really into, not that I don't really look like a punk, but I thought it was fascinating.
Absolutely.
So I
I
was,
was really into punk culture in the
yeah.
'80s. I know I don't look the type, but I
Well,
was.
maybe
Eh,
we are just anarchists somehow.
maybe, yeah. The former
But that's kind of
Minnesotans.
where the feminine edgy thing came from
Yeah.
too, is I loved that sensibility of, wow, they really work to get dressed in the morning. It's not like they just throw something on. Their hair is like all the way up here. And,
Yeah,
and
exactly, it takes work.
it does. It takes a lot of work. So when I found the mesh, I thought, well, okay, I want to put some distressed leather on this. I went to St. Mark's Place, bought an old jacket, cut it up, made my first sample with this mesh that I wasn't sure if I could get more of it or what,
Mhm.
but I showed it around and people went kind of crazy about it.
Wow.
I showed it to one store that had 3 locations, and I literally launched my business with one belt.
And you were,
25.
yeah, young
Hmm.
20s.
Yeah, it's
That
so
was your flair. That's your
foolish.
flair factor,
I think
like,
so,
and all
yeah.
the other things you do. But really, to me, someone's unique sense of style and
Mhm.
personal flair is using things in a way that they weren't meant to be used.
Right.
If you could collaborate with any artist, designer, or environmental activist, alive or dead,
Mm.
who would it be?
Well, there's this man, Ian, and I've forgotten his last name, but it's fascinating because he is working with denim, creating lifelike artwork. It almost looks like it's a photograph he does out of denim and
So he's creating art
painting.
like a painting, a
Right.
framed something, like
Yes.
decoupage or something that someone would hang on their wall.
But in such a special way.
Wow.
So I would love to do something with him
Right.
because I find him
I think
fascinating.
that that would be really interesting and that it's
Yes.
fusing both of the worlds, fashion and
Mhm.
design.
Yes.
Because in addition to fashion and clothing and accessories, you also have an interior design component to your
Right.
business.
Mhm.
Your pillows you create out
Yes.
of salvaged cashmere,
Mhm.
remnant cashmere, are incredible.
Well, I needed some stuff for my house.
And so when did this start? Was that sort of after the fashion piece of it or simultaneously?
I was always kind of creating my own pillows and things at home,
Mhm.
because I wanted something and I'd find cool fabric and I would just make it
Right,
instead of go shopping for
right.
it. And curtains
And if you
too.
envision something, then
Right.
if
So I paint the
incredible.
walls and I do all that kind of stuff.
Oh, I do
So
wanna talk to you
yes.
about that. Okay.
So some of it was like, okay, I need something red in this place, what for the fame, section, or I could just make it
Yeah.
instead of,
Instead of
going
worrying
out.
about going out in the world and
Mhm.
hunting for it.
So a lot of it came from just my need to have some throw pillows.
Mhm.
When I started working with cashmere, then I thought, all right, well, oh no, it was actually my jackets. I started with vintage fabric jackets when I first moved to LA because lo and behold, my belt line that got knocked off by a designer that I interviewed with.
Oh
They
my
said, "Oh, we love
gosh.
you. We want
And then
to
instead
we
that
want to hire you." And then I don't hear from them. They just ghosted me. It was a husband and wife.
and then they started doing it themselves?
They split up, they got divorced, and they both did it, but they did it so badly, and here's the thing about actually thinking about what you're doing before you launch it,
Mhm.
is test it first,
Right, make sure it worked.
and I had already done this, and
Mhm.
I had been doing belts for 10 years at that point, and I looked at their belts and I'm like, "Oh my god, these are gonna fall apart, and beyond that, it's gonna make my belts look like they're gonna fall apart." But
Right, if there's a
meanwhile,
right.
mine have been around for all this time, I've sold to the best stores all over the world, and these suck, and, I have to switch really quick, and I had just arrived in LA. It was
And
like my welcome to LA moment.
did you end up in LA for work because of the belts and other things, or for love for your
I
husband, or just it was time to move west?
so, I have relatives here in LA, in the LA area, mostly in Orange County. So, once I was here and then this whole knockoff situation happened, I thought, "Okay, I've gotta do something drastically different." So they'll start sewing. So I bought fabric and I started making things, and I found a really cool store in Venice where I was living in Venice that was very upscale and loved one of a kind, and I
Mhm.
started making stuff for her. So it allowed me to really get a handle on, well, how do people in LA dress? Because simply, completely different from
Right, that's a great point.
New York,
Mhm. The
different from,
style,
yeah,
yeah.
different from the Midwest and different from the South, etc. So I started sewing jackets out of one of a kind vintage fabrics, curtain fabrics.
Mhm.
So I'd find curtains, wash them, cut them, and
Mhm.
then I made one of a kind jackets, and they went crazy. It was just one of those things that at the time was a perfect
Right.
time for it. So I did that, and then I just fell in love with vintage everything. And once the jackets were kind of like over, because there's like a,
It's like a restaurant. No matter how much, I mean, there are some restaurants that do
yeah.
last decades and decades, but some it's
Mhm.
like,
It's a
some
flow,
things
it's a
lose favor,
yes,
clothing, styles change,
exactly.
yeah.
So it's more into knits. So I'm at the Rose Bowl and I'm looking around for some stuff and I see this pile of sweaters and I thought, that looks like cashmere. And it was a gigantic pile of cashmere sweaters. And they had holes in them and they had stains. And people get rid of cashmere because of those reasons
Yeah,
typically,
right.
or maybe you're just
They just
tired
think
of
it's
it and you
ruined.
just,
Right.
well, I didn't see it as ruined. I saw it as something that I could do some design on, like I could embellish it.
Hmm.
So I bought a few. I thought if I can wash this, then I can do something with it. I just can't dry clean them all because it's going to be really expensive. So yes, I can wash them. I hang them up to dry, and I started making appliques to cover up the holes,
Hmm.
and that's how the appliques were born on sweaters.
Okay.
Is by covering up
I love
boo-boos.
it.
I
So it
know.
just seems like it's a design detail, but it's
Hmm.
actually strategic and you're
Yes,
placing it in a way
typically it
to
is.
cover up
Yes.
damage. I would like to know if you incorporate storytelling into any of your fashion designs or whatever. We do this a lot with interior design spaces where it's like, I don't know,
Hmm.
it's like a narrative. It's
Hmm.
like, do you ever do that?
Everything's a story.
Yeah.
Every time you dress yourself, you're telling a story
Yeah.
about who you are. Are you feeling really edgy and goth? Are you feeling more like you want to be out in the country? So when I was working with a photographer and the whole production of making lookbooks and things that were printed.
Hmm.
Now I don't do printed lookbooks. I'll do
Hmm.
them online. But I had a stylist and I had a photographer and I had a makeup artist and I had a model and da da da. So my idea was
Such a
even with
production.
such a production, my first lookbook I said, I want to transform the girl into something else. And so I did a whole series of them like that. Every time I did one, people would say, "So what's your next girl doing?" You know? So it really became kind of an
What's your
interesting
next
thing. It's
girl doing?
what is she
You're like,
where's
she's doing
where
burlesque.
well, yeah, I know. I like the burlesque thing. But the first one was Pinup Girl Meets the Tiki Man.
Oh, this
Because
is amazing.
I know I love pinup
Yeah.
art, and so I did bustiers and kind of sexy stuff.
Right.
And so this beautiful redhead, Michelle, we had victory rolls in her hair and everything. It was quite beautiful. And so we sent her to Hawaii, right, in the photo shoot. And at the end, she's playing bongo drums
Oh my
with some
gosh.
kind of raffia thing on. So,
I love it.
and then I did Goth Girl Goes to the Country.
Okay.
I've done Urban Girl Goes to the Alps.
I feel like these are like still photographs I would
They are,
want to
yeah.
have framed very large in my house somewhere. I feel like it would be
Ah.
really incredible conversation inducing art.
Mhm. So I kind of like to do that again, but a lot of times now when I'm doing photo shoots, they're kind of like, let's just,
And it's all
you know.
expensive. You start factoring in like the location and the
Oh,
people and
well,
budget.
it was expensive,
Yeah.
frankly, but it was in the studio, which made it more possible for us to
Okay.
get through 30
Right.
looks in 4 hours
Right.
because we would
But
just
that would be
go.
really cool if you could do
Yeah, it
that.
was so fun. It
Yeah,
was so
I love
fun.
it. What is something surprising or unexpected you've learned in the fashion industry with sustainable fashion? Or not, maybe if it's not even with sustainable fashion, just anything.
Anything fashion, yeah. Well, in the beginning of like it was 2004 when words were created around the idea of what people like me were doing,
Mhm.
taking vintage fabrics and creating something new out of them. So I call them reincarnated because I couldn't explain this to someone who a store in New Jersey, actually, nothing about New Jersey,
Right.
but it was this particular person couldn't figure out what I was talking about when I said, recycled cashmere.
Mm.
So I just said, well, I'm just going to call it a different name then. So I called
Exactly.
it,
It's semantics.
yeah. So, okay, it's reincarnated. And that's still on my label.
I think it's
Ever.
genius. I love that.
Because I'm really looking at it and then creating a new life for it.
Right. And it's
So,
an inanimate object,
right.
but is it really? If it's cashmere is from the earth, and
Mhm.
everything has life, and I think it's
It all
interesting.
does when you start getting into energy work. It's like, okay,
Absolutely.
this thing remembers stuff,
And that is super relevant because
Mhm.
you brought up feng shui a while
Mhm.
ago,
Yep.
and I'm curious about your thoughts on that. And if you practice it, it sounds like you do.
I do. I have experts for this.
Okay.
Actually, I have a shaman too.
That's why I also
because-
wanted to talk to you about that. I'm so
Yeah.
fascinated by that.
Yeah, because for some reason, and I don't know, I guess maybe this is because of where I grew up and everything, but I have a real connection to the earth and the energy around it.
Right. Even when you say that you communicate
With
and, right with animals,
Mhm.
and when you were little, and
Yeah. Yes. They were my friends.
I love it.
When I first started understanding feng shui or being introduced to it, I was living in
Mhm.
Topanga.
Mhm.
And I was living in a house where there was a woman who was a neighbor who was quite obsessed with us.
Okay.
just obsessed. And
She was obsessed with you, as in like you and your husband at the time, or okay,
yeah, just anything.
okay.
But
Obsessed like as a compliment or nosy and creepy
really
obsessed?
bad, kind
Okay,
of
good.
creepy and
These are
bad.
the stories I want.
Really creepy and bad. So, I'm just wondering how to deal with her. I mean, I tried being nice to her, that didn't
Mhm,
work. She really had an issue with our landlord, and
mhm,
then she wanted the property, so she didn't want anybody there, so
mhm.
she would make such a fuss that people would move out.
Yeah,
And
she
as
just to make life like
I'm kind of a
unbearable.
stubborn girl,
Yeah,
so and
and
it
you're
was
like, you can't run me out.
no. So I used to belong to this group, and I wish we still were in, together, but it was called Women in Design,
Mhm,
and different women do different things. One's a writer, I'm a clothing designer, then there are all kinds of different people. And we had one meeting where there was a feng shui artist that was
mhm.
there. So she started talking about feng shui, and I had not heard of it really. I didn't know about it. So she started talking about different things that you can do. And I actually asked a question. I said, okay, I have this woman who's, I
Yeah,
explained the
how do I
situation a
deal
little
with the
bit.
difficult neighbor?
Right, and she gave me some ideas. She said you could put mirrors up, you could put salt, burn sage.
Well, I know
Uh,
about the sage, but I don't know about the
mhm.
mirrors or the salt. What does that
Yeah,
do?
mirrors reflect the energy back
Oh,
to
okay.
the person. So I did all of it.
Uh-huh. You're like,
I
"I'm
put
going feng
mirrors
shui
up.
big guns, big
So,
guns."
well, not only was she in back of us, she was next to us too. She owned the house next to us. So I was kind of surrounded by this woman. So I put mirrors up in her directions. I burned sage because I had it. My husband at the time, he passed away, but he was Native American.
Okay.
So
Oh,
so we had this Native American kind of spiritual
very
thing
cool.
too, which was helpful. We actually put up a fence really fast while she was out at the post office one day. We just like he built things, and it's like she was always
That is
looking.
so good.
She was always looking in the backyard, and I'm
Like, what is
like,
happening?
"Can we stop her from doing this?" He goes, "I have fence posts. As soon as we see her leave, help me hold it, and I'm just gonna zip it up there."
Instant fence.
Insta fence. And she comes back, and she's so pissed. I can hear her yelling. I'm like, "Thank you." So anyway, I did all these things, and I repeatedly did these
Mhm.
things, and all of a sudden, she decided to sell her property, both houses, and move to Ventura.
So you ran her out.
I did,
That's amazing.
without doing
I'm
anything
gonna say
except for
that's feng
just
shui.
it is.
Wait, so the mirrors reflect the energy. What does the salt do?
The salt is a kind of protection
You're
thing.
teaching me. Like, I know
Right.
about feng shui, but there's
Mhm.
obviously so much that I don't know still because I know certain principles, but I don't know the why behind them. And I like
Right.
knowing the why behind them.
Yes.
So the salt,
Is for protection. Like
okay.
you could if you're finding that you're being bugged at home or
Mhm,
something, or you feel like your neighborhood's not safe, or you've got a neighbor that's doing something,
mhm.
put salt around your whole house. I just put it around the perimeter of the
And
property where
it
I live.
absorbs the negative energy?
It is more of a protection
Oh,
barrier.
got it. It's
And
a
you can
barrier.
just put it right in front of your doors
Uh-huh.
too, wherever your entrances are.
We built a home in Park City a bunch of years ago, and it was just there were a lot of things that went wrong during the process and a builder
Mm,
and blah, blah, blah.
mhm,
And so it started as a joke, and then it wasn't a joke at all. I loved it, even though my husband at first was like, "This is weird. I don't think I wanna be here for this." Where we had a smudging. We had a
mhm,
whole energy clearing, and I brought my girlfriends over, and we had wine, and this amazing couple, these 2 women brought all of this stuff and the drums and the sage but
mhm.
so many different salts and crystals.
Yes.
And it started as like I wasn't making fun of it. I loved it and believed in it, but it was also kind of funny because I was with all my
Mhm.
friends who had no idea what they were getting into. We're in this ski
Right.
home in Park City, and I'm like, we're gonna have a saging. I loved that during some part of it, it's like the dogs felt it.
Sure.
Both one dog got up and ran underneath the bed and wouldn't come out. I was like, something is happening here, which I loved.
Yeah.
So then tell me how that
Mhm.
ties into the shaman, because I also shaman. I never know how to pronounce it.
Shaman,
Shaman.
I think.
I had a girlfriend also in Utah whose brother was becoming a practitioner, and
Mhm.
um he needed to lead, but also I was dying to go to like a sweat lodge
Oh,
experience.
yeah. Mhm.
And so we did it, and I was with my staff and coworkers. We joke, no HR. I'm like,
Mhm.
"Don't sue me if something goes bad."
Oh,
Goes
exactly.
badly.
It's hot.
But it was very difficult, and it was
Mhm.
really incredible. And some
Yes.
of them say they would never do it again, and it's about 3 years later now, and I'm like, "I would actually do that again." It was a
Mm.
pretty cool feeling.
I loved the sweat lodge. My husband was firekeeper at a sweat lodge up in, Malibu at the Wright property.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
because
tell me about your experience with I think that's just fascinating, and
I
energy and
loved it.
homes and
So
creativity and art.
the shaman part of it, like in the beginning, I was just doing feng shui on my own and I
Mhm,
didn't know
mhm.
really. I was just saying, okay, let me do these things that this woman suggested. And it seemed to work. I'm like, there's something about that's very
There's something
interesting.
to this.
But in the house, there was a ghost that was smoking in the stairwell.
Oh,
And I would always smell the cigarettes.
okay.
There were not people around us that were smoking. I didn't smoke. My husband didn't smoke. But it would bug me because my studio was downstairs and it kind of creeped me out. So I'm like, there's ghosts in here and I just don't want them here. And how do I get rid of them? So, yeah, there was somebody that was an earthbound spirit
Okay.
and we just helped that person move away.
Amazing.
Child, I also saw one as when I was a little girl on the farm. There was a little girl named Clara that knew I could see her.
Oh my
So I
gosh.
used to play with her. And then I told my mom about Clara. She's like, oh no.
And now did your mom say, "Don't tell people these things," or did
She
she
just
embrace it?
said, no, she just said that that wasn't true.
Okay.
I'm like, well, I see her. She's got dark hair. She kind of has dark eyes because she's dead, but you know,
Yeah.
but she's there. So actually, just about a couple years ago, I work with someone who's an energy worker. I learned how to communicate with animals
Mhm.
more through her and then other things. But I asked her about Claire. I said, can you tell me anything about her that you can see? And she said, well, what happened is when somebody else was living there on that property, way, way, way before my great grandfather was there, and the Indians came in and killed the family.
Mhm.
And the little girl was so young, she just didn't know what happened. So she got stuck.
Okay.
And then when she saw you, she realized you could see her.
Right. You were
Then
her friend.
I
Then
was
she
her
hung
friend.
out? She
Yeah.
hung around.
But she was stuck. So we helped her move along.
Mhm.
And that was just a couple years ago. So,
You know what? And I do think even to bring it back to your creations and what you do, I think that
mm,
there is a sense I mean, I know everybody has it. Like I'd say everybody is creative. Even people who think that they aren't
absolutely.
creative, I
Yeah.
think everybody has a creativity and an artist's way if they can tap into it.
Hmm.
But I feel like it also goes hand in hand that you have so much creative ability and you're sewing, and it's not just sewing because that sounds very mechanical. Your
Hmm.
designs, like you can envision things. And if you can envision that and create
Hmm.
something out of that, it makes sense to me that it's
Right.
also the person who can see things in a different realm,
Yeah.
in just like a non-traditional way.
Right, because ideas
Things
are
aren't
really
just black and white.
non-tangible, really. I mean,
Right.
they're sort of,
Right.
floating around
That's a
there,
great way to say it.
right?
Yep.
So actually, what I interviewed 15 people last year for a summit, Out of the Blue into Reality is what the title of the summit was. And I wanted to hear different people's creative process.
Mhm.
Like, how do you take an idea that just maybe comes to you out of the blue,
Mhm.
like the Milanese mesh? It
Mhm.
just showed up. Well, it was there, but I found it,
Yeah. It found you.
So it was an out of the blue kind of thing. Cashmere's was the same thing at the Rose Bowl. And I just had to recognize that it was an important enough thing to spend some time with.
Mhm.
So how does that work? And how do you recognize those ideas? And how do you it's not about manifestation, really,
Yeah.
right?
And honoring it instead of just
Hmm.
passing it by. It's like
Right.
this was put in my path maybe for a
For a
reason.
reason. And
Yeah.
sometimes it takes me a while to realize, why do I have this?
Right.
But I'll come back to it later. It's like, oh, that's why, because I can use that for this or whatever. But really it's nurturing that idea
Yeah.
and working it out and visualizing it. I see ideas like a movie. So if I have some fabric, I'm like, all right, I want to do this. I can see it like a movie. For me, that's how it is. But other people are maybe more, they sketch something out
Mhm.
or they'll drape it out or they'll write it out, something
Mhm.
like that.
Tell everyone where you can be found on
Okay.
social media.
Hmm. Well, the easiest way to find all the social media is on my website,
Okay.
deborah.lindquist.com. I've actually had a website since the internet was invented.
Is it
Isn't
really?
that crazy? Like a friend of mine built my first site for
I
me.
love that.
I
It's
know.
pretty impressive.
Yeah. It's like, well, there's this new thing called the World Wide Web.
Called the world. I was just about to say
Hmm.
the World Wide Web.
Yeah.
When
So
we were like, that's never going to be a thing.
no, it's not going to work. So on my social media, you can find me there. Sign up for my email list though, because I always have things going
Like a
on.
newsletter or something?
Yes.
Okay.
So sign up for that. And then on my homepage, you'll see a connection to my courses,
Okay.
and that has its own website.
Okay.
I build websites too
Oh
because
my
I
gosh. There's
learned
no shortage of your skills.
I had to learn how to because I needed updates,
Oh, right.
regular updates because
Right.
it's fashion.
Right.
It's like I can't wait 6 months for an update. It's already, season's
Yeah.
over. So you can see my courses there. And yeah, there's social media for both.
Well, and it'll be all up when this airs. But I just appreciate you so much and bringing your flair factor today. You have so
Yes.
much of it. You have flair in spades and all of your creativity. And
I know, I love the name of your
thank you.
I love the name of
Thank
your
you.
business,
Well,
because you are finding things that are flair. I mean, nobody wants to see a homogenized kind of home. I got the
no.
entire everything at Costco, you know.
Yeah. No, I want to see unique, one of a kind in the
Yes.
way somebody put something together. So
For sure.
you are definitely doing that. And I really appreciate it. And thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Hey, thanks for listening to today's episode of The Cult of Flair. I'm Stephanie Hunt. If you like what you heard, please share it with a friend. Follow the podcast on whatever platforms you are listening. Follow me on Instagram at The Flairhunter or at The Cult of Flair. And until next time, go find your flair.